Welcome to the Omni Gamers Club podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, including the dusty old DSi XL. I am Mark USA.
I am Daniel Winter, and this is Ted here behind me for those watching on video, ever-present part of the podcast here.
Yeah, and I have Mochi on my lap and possibly on the microphone feed as well. Not quite on the camera, so you may hear a gentle purring in the background. That's due to this fuzzy companion that I have over on my end.
couldn't do without it. So this is our first episode of the year. Happy
That's right.
2025. We're going to do something a little different today, just ease ourselves back into the routine. We missed a couple of weeks over the break between holiday, family commitments, and illnesses. So I thought it's probably a good opportunity to briefly just talk about what we're doing. There might be a few new listeners for the podcast. So I don't know if you want to just talk through what we normally do here.
Yeah, for sure. I think we started on a pretty regular cadence of covering one video game and then alternating to another video game. Another tabletop game, typically a board game. But being as Omni Gamers is our moniker. But we've sort of branched out over time, and we've covered a few tabletop RPGs. We've even started just discussing tabletop war games in chat form. But basically, our show now, the Omni Gamers Club podcast, if you're just tuning in afresh, covers all manner of games like all those that I mentioned. And we alternate between a sort of a single game that we cover as a main segment, sometimes 2 or 3 related games. And then the other episode of the month would be or of the week would be kind of what you've been playing, kind of more real time.
Everything else in the bucket.
Yeah, for sure. We even talk about news that comes up or news to us. But mostly we keep it pretty casual.
Yeah, I've struggled. I've flip-flopped over the last few months as to whether what we do is even classified as a review or just something more conversational and casual. I do think we get into games critique, games criticism, not in the negative term, but in the sort of the reviewer sense of what it is, like just discussing a game, what it means to us, what it does well, and it's great to compare our thoughts on that. And I've always enjoyed our deep dives on one particular game. So looking forward to more of those. We have some exciting ideas in the new year. But first, I guess we should see out the old year, and we wanted to talk a little bit about our favorite games. Or it's so hard to talk about games of the year, and we both have families and jobs, and play a fraction of what's released out there. We're never going to be a particularly comprehensive podcast, and so I'm increasingly disinterested in the arbitrary sort of categorization of our only games released in 2024. There are so many games from prior. We've always loved showcasing older games, smaller indie games, games that maybe I started in 2023 but didn't get around to finishing until last year. So largely, this is games that we enjoyed in 2024. I've seen a few friends frame this as their favorite game experiences of 2024 and sort of broadening that framework a little bit, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. I forgot to mention that we never cover timely games. Very, very rarely do we cover brand new games that come on Xbox Game Pass, but we also cover, classic games, just games that we haven't gotten around to in a while, or just beloved old classics. Really not the hotness at all, per se. We just kind of do it scattershot, just games that fit our taste. I don't know. In Canada, Western Canada, there's that Jack FM radio station that they play whatever they want, and we play whatever we want to. Which is just an excuse to have a conversation between friends on a semi-regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And we're thankful that we have so many listeners that have come up to us and told us that they listen and keep us energized to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of the podcast was picking games that are somewhat accessible, older games that are widely available, that perhaps everyone can play along and join the club and compare your thoughts.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's dive into games that we've enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
in 2024.
Do you want to start us off? I think we'll start with video games as usual.
Sure. I was kind of struggled to if we were doing a sort of like top five or whatever of the year. But I'll just do sort of memorable games that I played in 2024.
Mm.
One came out in that year is Star Wars Outlaws. I
Mm-hmm.
know that you played a little bit of it.
Little bit.
Yeah, from Ubisoft. It's I think maybe their first Star Wars outing in some while. It was that license was locked up by EA for some time. And we've covered Star Wars games in the past. We did the Jedi Survivor games, for instance, which we gave generally a positive review on. So I was very interested in checking out this one. We haven't seen a game from the non-Jedi perspective, for the most part, non-soldier perspective from Star Wars, really, other than really far-reaching examples I could think of. Nothing that covers like the scum and villainy type, the smugglers on the outer rim. So this was a nice outing. I really like the main character, Kay, and her little pet friend. I forget his name. The little
Nix.
Nix, the
Axolotl dog or
axolotl
something.
monster, that the cute mascot, sort of takes place of the droid that a lot of the other games have the main character follow them. Yeah, it's not a surprising game. It's just an open world Ubisoft game with a lot of care in the production value. And I think they did just enough to differentiate it from their Assassin's Creeds, their Far Cries, their other games that just sort of follow the tried and true model. You're not climbing up,
Formulaic.
yeah, you're not climbing up towers and diving off of them. Thank goodness. I enjoyed it. Didn't blow my mind, but it was fun, and I intend to go back to it.
Yeah, I only played a few hours of that over the holiday break before I had to return it to the library, and it definitely is breaking from the Ubisoft formula. It did to me still feel a little bit bloated and just stuff to do and overwhelming with some side quests and checkpoints and just all the cities were just so overwhelming with very overstimulating, shall we say? But the character was engaging, and like I want to try and force myself to stay focused because I've heard that game it does get better over time as you layer on a few more systems.
Right.
So maybe try and sort of follow the main path a little bit and not get too distracted.
Yeah, of any game that has come out recently, it's definitely a sort of a theme park experience,
Mm.
a Disney theme park experience, just like the real world Star Wars one that they have in California. And unlike games like the Jedi Survivor, Jedi Outcast games that we cover, those are fairly like linear. There are some open world areas, but they pretty much stick to the action, right?
Mm.
They keep you on a course, pretty straight and narrow. Even though you can branch in a couple of different directions, you're mostly playing in the arena of exploration and combat. And in this one, you can sort of just like take a break, just kind of stand there and just kind of look
Yeah.
over a vista, or just kind of like listen to the sounds of aliens and gambling or trading or whatever it is, and just kind of exist in that world a little bit as a kind of a regular person, quote unquote. So that part of it I enjoyed. It's a different scale of experience,
Yeah,
right?
I love games that you can just walk through slowly and soak in the atmosphere, and the fact that there were so many like lean in buttons in this game to just like enjoy the vistas. Yeah, I did appreciate that.
Yeah, so I'll just say that I enjoyed it. I intend to go back to it. They have made some decent quality of life improvements as well. So if you tried it early on and kind of didn't it rub you the wrong way, maybe because of its strong reliance on stealth. Apparently, they've pulled that back a little bit as well and sort
Hmm.
of rebalanced some things. So you may find that you enjoy it. And if you want a casual Star Wars experience, which I imagine most Star Wars fans do, then this is well worth checking out, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
fun to get out to the frontiers of that world, away from the Skywalkers and the Jedi and Coruscant.
Yeah, precisely. All right, Daniel, how about yourself?
Yeah, just a couple of quick honorable mentions I wanted to shout out was Against the Storm, the first game we covered in 2024, the sort of city builder, cyclical city builder where you kind of have to like rebuild a city over and over again, and then really got into that core loop of the best part being the first couple of hours of building a city before it gets too overwhelming. Uh, I did mean to go back to that, but I enjoyed what I experienced of it, and they've been adding a lot of new content since, new factions, new buildings, new races, and continuing to expand on that. So that I did really enjoy that one. There was Chants of Sennaar that which we covered, and Heaven's Vault, a very similar game that I played, both covering language. Chants of Sennaar as a sort of language as a puzzle, and Heaven's Vault using language as a sort of narrative device, both from a sort of archaeological perspective, which I really appreciated. But I think both didn't go quite far enough into the directions that I wanted, into sort of the more cultural angles. A little too gamified in the end, I think, than what I was looking for there. But they did both have a lot of fascinating hooks in how language works in games. And one other one that I literally just started last night and will probably be on my game of the year if I finished it was Thank Goodness You're Here. It's like a 2D exploration puzzle game set in northern England with a very strong humoric sort of funny bone angle, and lots of this littered with humor. It feels like you're walking through a Where's Wally scene, and just everything you pass is some quirky little character or sign with a joke on it, and very much leaning into that British sense of humor. You have to be into the funny name type humor and very suggestive language. So I'm looking forward to diving in more of that. So it'll probably be on my game of the list next year, perhaps.
Very nice. And Daniel was referencing Where's Waldo for Canadian
I'm
and
sorry.
US
Yes.
fans of the book series. Of course, the Hunting That Guy Down book series that's popular around the world. I'm going to mention a couple of games in quick succession as well, because they sort of touched the same bone in my body, which was Prince of Persia Lost Crown and Metroid Dread, which are two obvious 2D platforming Metroidvanias, as you might imagine from the latter. And they might not have come out in 2024, but they scratched an itch that I didn't know I was feeling. I've always loved Metroidvania games, but I didn't realize I'd been hankering for one for a long time. And those two cover a lot of, well-tread ground, but they do it with a level of expertise that's really notable. And they also try a couple of slightly different things, a couple of slightly different sort of ways of pacing the game, pacing tension. Dread has those notorious Emmys, those sort of hunter droids that sort of pursue you throughout various sections of the game, totally changing the dynamic and adding a great degree of tension, which I think, that game really generally lacked in the series before that. And Lost Crown really has a sort of like action timing, sort of like fluid platforming sort of precision that it demands, that a lot of Metroidvanias generally do not. Most of them are just about the exploration, but this one has really solid combat that's both melee and ranged, in addition to the excellent, solid exploration. So both those games I really enjoyed because I've been wanting to play a really good Metroidvania, and those two are solid examples of that genre.
Yeah, I played through The Lost Crown last year as well, and the only reason it's not on my list is probably is that it's not really doing anything new, but it is a very strong one of those. And it starts out a little bit slow, but by the end, the movement is so fluid, as you were saying, the way you can slide and round and bounce and dash, and a lot of great mobility options you have there. The thing that really stood out to me though was the combat. It was a little bit, I mean, obviously inspired by something like Dark Souls or probably more Hollow Knight, in that it's a little more difficult and parry based than your regular Metroid game. But I remember the boss fights were always started out feeling incredibly overpowered, like just attacks coming from every which way, and pillars of magic, and like just feeling impossible. But then as you start to figure out by trial and error what is dodgeable, what is blockable, parryable, you just get this really fantastic rhythm and dance of like you learn the rhythm and get into the groove, and it's really satisfying to nail those boss fights once you learn it.
Right, and Lost Crown, unlike Metroid Dread, is gives you a lot of freedom in how you want to equip and sort of load out
Mm.
your character. Metroid Dread, you generally have all the equipment that you've unlocked all at your all at your fingertips, but you have a lot of options, including secondary sort of um, effects and attacks that you can load up in addition to the little amulets that might give you passive boosts as well.
Which is basically the badge system from Hollow Knight. Again, it felt very much influenced by that, but again, very solid one of those. Hopefully, we get some Silk Song this coming year.
Wouldn't that be nice? It's been a long time coming. All right, some other games you've been playing.
Yeah, so my first game of the year I wanted to shout out was Little Kitty Big City. I don't remember if I discussed this on the podcast, but it was a favorite of myself and my daughter and my dad who was visiting. They all loved playing it and were watching me play it. It's basically a platformer in a very small city that you're running around, sort of open world. You play as a cat. And I mentioned Stray previously and how it was ostensibly a cat game, but felt like you were more. It was more about you being a robot piloting a cat. Whereas this feels like you inhabit the cat in a much more explicit way. There's so many fantastic little animations of the way it like squeezes in under under a hole in a door, or sidles along to like brushing people's legs, or knocks things over. There's lots of little attention to detail in how cats can be so much like cartoon characters. Just there's fantastic animations, and it's all very wholesome, and just like you're doing little quests around town to help another cat maybe knock over some jars or collect some feathers, or pretty low stakes stuff. But I think that's partly why my daughter loved it so much. Like it's a game with no fail state. Just explore this space, have some fun, find some collectibles. Like the main collectible is always capsules, like gacha capsules that all have hats to put on your cat, and like it was like must be 100 of them, and my daughter was still cackling every time, even like 99 hats into the game. So just a really joyful, colorful game if you love cats.
Yeah, the mention of hats instantly reminded me of Another Crab's Treasure, which is
Mm,
another newer game that we covered
mm.
in the year as well. Very nice. Okay, I'm going to mention one more honorary mention. I think that's what they're called. Unicorn Overlord. It's
Mm,
still a game that I intend to go back to, but something about it, I think the story was never really solid. I think
mm.
that's generally the criticism that a lot of reviewers gave to the game, even though the character designs are quite lovely and varied. And the scenarios are, I suppose, somewhat interesting in their own right. But there's something about that gameplay that's enjoyable in the moment, but it doesn't have a hook that keeps you locked into it for long term.
Mm.
So it's sort of fallen to the wayside for me. So I'll mention another game that I enjoyed that brings a layer of polish to an old familiar formula. So that's going to be Metaphor Refantazio.
Mm.
I played it a little bit. I've only had it for a week, but I played it pretty intensely at that time. And it basically fixes everything about Persona that I disliked. Basically, every critique, every qualm I had with the Persona series, which has been a little bit long on the tooth for me of late, it just sort of squashes. It just feels like it's got a whole new energy to it. It has it does everything that Persona series does well, even better. It has so many quality of life improvements, and the story, as far contrast to Unicorn Overlord as possible, sort of really interesting, like a kind of like a anime series or whatever, with twists and turns and characters that are introduced in new scenarios at a really pretty regular clip, that it's sort of kept me interested, and I'm just waiting for the moment that it returns to me from the library, the copy that's gone around. It'll be many more weeks, I'm sure. But I think that's kind of okay for me. I'm sort of a dilly-dallyer when it comes to games. I think the shorter time I have with them, the better, because it keeps me sort of energized. So Metaphor Fantasio just seems like a cut above the rest
Mm.
in quality and just polish and an improvement to a long-running series, a fresh injection of blood that was really needed from to that publisher, giving them a chance to sort of go in a strong new direction without the baggage of that long-running series persona behind it.
Yeah, there's a pretty good chance this would have been on my list, like where I just deeper into the game. I really enjoyed what I've seen so far. I think I just beat the boss on the first big dungeon, basically. The first time you're given an allotment of time. You have this many days to beat this boss in this dungeon. So I am really enjoying it so far. I've heard that it's much more flexible in the time you're given. That it's easier to do everything to max out all the relationships without having to like min max with a guide. You can just follow what interests you and not feel like you're constantly missing out on things. So it's a little more lenient in that sense. Yeah, a lot more responsive in the in the combat. Like there's if anything's lower than you, you can just like instantly hit a button and like attack them in the overworld rather than having to go in and out of a battle screen every like mook you come across. And yeah, the class system. Looking forward to digging into like the mixing and matching of classes and how you can do that. It's a little bit fiddly, like and having to like match the right classes to the right enemies as you progress through a dungeon. But I'm enjoying exploring that so far. So looking forward to getting back to that this year.
Yeah, I'm just counting down the days until it gets back. How about yourself? Other video games you've been enjoying?
Yeah, let's get to the next one. Harold Halibut. So again, we covered this for a featured episode, and quite possibly my game of the year. And one that didn't get a lot of love or praise from other outlets, but it just spoke to me on a personal level. It was a very gentle, slow story in a way that's probably going to bore a lot of people. So it's hard to give a broad recommendation. But just for one thing, there was just an incredible amount of artistry and humanity in every scene because it's all like handcrafted stop motion animation. And that you can like literally see the thumbprints on all the characters. And it was just just a very quaint story. I mean, the writing like it had some of the British tendencies of like funny names, or like I mean Harold Halibut, Cassandra Castlechop, but that's about as far as it went. Like every time you expect it to be a really like clever or funny script, it just goes for something more genuine instead, which I think is fairly rare these days. And just a very heartwarming, gentle story about like friendship in space. Like you're on the other side of the galaxy, but they're more interested in exploring the inner workings of these characters rather than going out and exploring the worlds around them. So I just really appreciated that as this is a gentler story. And yeah, especially in 2024, you need a little love there. So I really enjoyed Harold Halibut.
Yeah, that game is definitely memorable, and it's goes in directions that other games just don't go, which is refreshing. Definitely, since it's easy to get so jaded with like kind of formulaic games that we've all played 100 times before. Speaking of which, I'm going to mention a game that is kind of does a little bit of both. It goes in directions we've seen before, but with another high degree of polish, and revisits a famous property. So I'm going to talk about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I'm not going to talk about it at length because maybe we'll discuss it in a feature episode. But of course, that's definitely a 2024 game. It's definitely got a lot of buzz, and it's probably the only successful Xbox exclusive of recent memory that I can think of. And I think, I don't know about sales success, but definitely it has critical success from a lot of different outlets. And the game is solid. I enjoyed every moment I played of it. I did step away to play a few different games, but that's just my personality. Is like I kind of have to walk away from a game that I'm playing too intensely because something about it, I don't want to get sick of it. I don't want to get sick of a game that I'm enjoying. I want it to be sort of fresh. And I basically finished the first area, the first large area, which is I think it's pretty well known that it's set in Rome around the Vatican. And then I went to the next major area, and I'm just starting to get deeper into there and exploring that secondary area more. The narrative is opening up. Even they're introducing a few more exploration mechanisms. The gameplay is mostly reminiscent of what you do in the first area, but with a slightly different flair, just because the geography of it is different. You get a different feel. But really, what struck me about that game was the sort of like the artistry and the loving care that they applied to that license. Some people will be probably against this game just because it's very mainstream. You know, it tackles a very mainstream media property for old people like us, and it does it with like sort of unabashed love. And I myself, I think you and I probably discussed this. I've never been like a Indiana Jones diehard, right?
No, neither.
I think it probably speaks to maybe people that are slightly older than even us, maybe 10, 20 years older than us, people that maybe remember those old movie and radio serials that it's based on. Like Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, the gentlemen their age. But there's a certain mystique about it. And like so many people have said, every game sort of wants to be every multiple successful game series just want to be Indiana Jones, and this is Indiana Jones, but it didn't tackle it like Lara Croft would or like Uncharted would. It's doing it in a way that's really honest and true to the film series, and slightly different ways as well. Like I don't think the camera mechanism that's utilized so heavily in the game was ever found in the movies, right? It's just like a different sort of UI affordance that Machine Games has introduced in their own right to some great success. I think it really works, but quite honestly, it's just the love, right? I sense the love and the artistry and the care in their treatment of this property, and I honestly thought it couldn't really be done well, but they did it well. So, kudos to them. I'm impressed. Who knows if it'll last through the entire run of the game, because I'm only somewhat fairly early in the game. But what I've played of it, I've really enjoyed, and it's been like kind of some of the best gaming experiences that I've had, quite honestly.
Yeah, I was literally playing this 10 minutes before we jumped on this recording, so I'm still enjoying that one. It is a game that gets better over time. Probably would have been on my list had I not seen that you had it on yours, and I would have gotten to talk about it anyway. So, last episode I talked about how it plays with some elements of immersive sim games that I really love. It doesn't really go particularly hard. Of course, I was kicking myself immediately after it for not calling it an immersive slim. But I think I started to appreciate how it doesn't get too deep into those, because if you were to spend 5 minutes like scoping out every combat arena and then spending 20 minutes like carefully sneaking around and knocking out each enemy one at a time, it would not feel like Indiana Jones. So you get to like get stealthing around and throwing weapons and using your whip to distract enemies. It's all very pulpy and simple, but in a way that lets you keep the pacing of the game moving and gets you to inhabit Indiana Jones. And this maintains that pacing in a really clever way that you never feel pulled down by the weight of the systems. And I would definitely have some nitpicks, I think, with some of the I literally just hit a bug with one of the main quests that I'm going to have to try and figure out. I think those collectibles are a little bit too much. Like, you were talking about getting tired of a game, and I think I've definitely gone through phases like I spent too much time wandering around taking photos. I need to try to mainline this before I get tired of it. But otherwise, no, it is a fantastic game. I'm not entirely on board with Indiana's sort of branch of archaeology. Still very much in the oh, just destroy this whole temple, but we got the one artifact. It's fine. That's all that matters, right? But one thing I do appreciate is that each place you go to, there is representatives of that culture advocating for themselves, advocating for their history. And the museum that Indiana Jones is sending these things to isn't always the British Museum. So advocating for local museums and culture, which is always appreciated.
Yeah, I think that they wouldn't have done that if it wasn't 2024 when
Mhm.
this game was coming out, right? That
Yeah,
famous line from the movies, "It belongs in the
but
museum,"
which
has
museum?
always been contentious, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
does it? Which museum exactly? That's archaeology for you. But like you say, it is, you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. It's sort of like
Yeah.
everyone thought that being a paleontologist would be just like Jurassic Park, right? Which it clearly isn't. It's sort of a Hollywood version of those sorts of
Hmm.
professions. Definitely. All right. How about another game that you enjoyed?
Yeah, I'll keep this one brief since we discussed it a little bit recently anyway. That is Aliens Dark Descent, which I know you've been playing a bit of. And so I played this at the start of the year, so I'm a little bit rusty on my thoughts on it, but to be honest. But I did just really appreciate the pacing of it, and that it's a real-time game. But rather than having to like micromanage 20 units across a map, you just got, it's basically you have 4 or 5, I think. I think it increases over the course of the campaign, but you have a number of like Marines that all move as one autonomous unit. So you just click a location, they all move together, and so you don't have to worry about positioning them. You can just be focused on their mental health and their supplies,
Physical
and
health. Yeah.
yeah, and managing that rather than the positioning, and which can get very fiddly. So you're not having to worry about like the clicks per minute in terms of micromanaging that. So I really appreciated that little twist. And then you've got the whole XCOM level of like managing your squad and the base and upgrades, which is always good fun. So yeah, really appreciated that. It's a great Aliens game. They're on a good run between that and, I mean, Alien Isolation is 10 years old, but between those two, I think there's a pretty good spread of games set in that universe now.
All right. I think there was that sort of more action-oriented one, Fire Team,
Oh,
which I didn't
yeah,
play.
yeah. I played a little bit of that. That was okay too. Hmm.
But yeah, that's really interesting that they are tackling, they're keeping these old properties alive in video game form in a way that's maybe like more successful than Hollywood is doing. Dennis and I talked about this a little bit on the last episode where you were away, where a lot of these properties are sort of failing on the big screen, like Star Wars, the latest iterations, even the Marvel ones are losing their sort of charm. But video game outings of some of these older properties have been kind of knocking it out of the park. Not universally, not every single one, but obviously you can just do different things and take bigger risks in those worlds that maybe some Hollywood execs would not be super comfortable with
Hmm.
doing for a big summer or holiday tentpole feature film.
Yeah, games just have more breadth to explore these IPs, for lack of a better term, at the edges, and sort of broadening what they can mean. And the like Aliens is a fascinating universe, but the movies have become a little fixated. So getting to just to see the broader world and how how these world how the like how a colony lives and expands in that game is quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and like Fire Team and Dark Descent are examples of where you could have two games out at the same time in the same license, and each attracts a different game player
Mm.
uh, to it. Not it doesn't all have to be speaking the same language. You can do that in games with much more flexibility than you can with film media. So I think it's fertile ground.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Why don't
All right.
you jump ahead?
I am going to talk about the video game that has taken up the most of my attention in 2024. And we've talked about it a little bit in the past, so I won't belabor it. And I know that you don't love this game as much as I do, but I'm hoping I can provide a little bit of perspective as to why I enjoy this so much. So this game is, my game of the year is, video game of the year is Balatro. And I'm not the only one. Several outlets
Oh,
have
yeah.
called this one their game of the year. And it's been controversial because others will just say, is that even a game? Is this even worth just talking about in the same breath as XX game here or XY game there? And I think the reason why I keep coming back to this game a lot is not because of the jingling sound effects and the flashing lights. Most of the times I play this, I play it with the sound off, for instance.
Hmm.
Don't listen to the soundtrack whatsoever. I don't know what the theme song sounds like. I play it on big screens, on smaller screens. I mostly, don't tell my boss, I mostly play it while I'm working. So it's just kind of there in the background. The reason why I like this game and other sort of digital deck building style games is that they trigger my interest in game design. So, and I'm not the only one. My oldest kid is big into this game and other games like Slay the Spire as well. Deck building in the original form, in games like Magic the Gathering, allow you to try things out, to kind of theorize a strategy, and to implement it, to test it, see it fail, and then to tweak and to improve. And that is an impulse that I know many people enjoy. Not everyone enjoys, but some people, I think, like myself, enjoy a great deal. It's this constant tinkering and improvement and the desire to execute well. It's not a game that I'll ever be a grandmaster of. It's you can't, right? Because there's so much RNG in it. But that's not the point. The point is to go into that gauntlet each time with the few random seeds that you have and try and make something of it. It's the reason why I've played so many solo games of Agricola on Bois de Jeu, or so many solo games of Terraforming Mars, or so many solo games of Feast for Odin, is because I want to get those cards shuffled. I want them thrown in my face and it being like, what can you do with these? Try and rub these sticks or glue these tools together and see what you can do with it. And I think that challenge, that sort of constant mystery box of being thrown those tools and try to improvise is a ever living challenge for me that I constantly enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to belabor the reasons why I don't enjoy this game. I played the demo and I got a need out of it. Not that I didn't enjoy it. I could see the appeal. I think we'll discuss this a little bit next episode, but I think I'm just a little bit fed up with roguelike games and just the needs of just pulling the random number generator over and over again until the stars align and you get the jackpot, right? And I think I do really enjoy that entry level of these games where you're improvising with a box of random scrap and like make what you do with this. It just feels like inevitably all of these games get to the point where you have to start min-maxing things and like, oh, within a couple of hands it's clear this isn't going to be the run, hit restart, oh, this isn't it, restart, and like just hitting the number generator until the stars align and you get the right setup.
That might be 100% right for you, but that's not right for me.
Okay.
Because the reason why I'm playing it is not to win. The reason why I'm playing it is to challenge myself. Like, I want to play a run that's unfair against me.
Yeah.
I want to play a run that's not optimal for me. And I won't restart a run because I know that I'm going to fail. I'd rather run it into the ground and fail because it gives me new ideas about how I can combine things next time. So that's what I mean about how certain people, probably like myself, that have this sort of mental illness or whatever, enjoy that sort of way that it challenges and demands things of you to improvise.
Yeah, and so that's how I love to appreciate. I love to play these games without ever restarting, and always like let the run be what it is, and draw some enjoyment out of that. Like the worst Binding of Isaac run or the worst Slay the Spire run can still be some enjoyment rather than maximizing the win-loss ratio. But it does depend, like, how does the game frame progression? Like, I know there is like a series of decks you can work through in Balatro, and whether you can still feel that you're progressing on the game's terms can be I don't know, a bit up in the air. But it's interesting that you said you don't play this with the music on, because I wanted to shout out one of the podcasts I've been listening to is the Rebel FM video game spectacular, I think they call it. Basically, every year they do a big compilation of all the music from video games over the year, and there's always a bunch that I've missed, and will go out and buy a game just based purely on the music. And the Balatro music was a banger. I will say I've quite enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's a weakness of mine is that
Mm.
I don't have a lot of appreciation for video game music, which is not a universal case. I obviously enjoy the classics, and if a game has like spoken dialogue or whatever, obviously I'll be listening to the music or whatever in the background. But a lot of digital card games for me are just a background activity.
Fair.
So I would rather listen to a podcast
Exactly. Yeah.
talking about introducing me to a new idea, or like a actual play role playing game or something like that, learning
Mm.
something new. I guess it's just try to inject as much media into my brain as possible at the same time. But you're right, I should listen to and appreciate video game music more. And I hear Balatro is a great case for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing it for 100 hours, maybe it doesn't hold up that long, but
Sure.
at least for a couple of rounds. But it's interesting you were talking about how it's efficiency of game design and how clear its intentionality is in all of its mechanics are so obvious and how you interact with it. Because that's one of the key reasons why I've enjoyed my next game is UFO 50. So it's hard to, I mean, it's hard to talk about any one particular game in this. I've only played 10 of the, yeah, played 10 of the games so far. So the first row, basically. I've fallen a little bit behind in working through. I was following another podcast, the Eggplant Show, which is doing like one game per week. I've fallen a little bit behind there, but still really enjoying it so far. And even when games don't hit, it is just fascinating as that efficiency of game design and just following the design logic and intentionality behind every one of these choices, where you can see what they were doing, or I can see what you were going for, even if it doesn't work. I can appreciate what you were trying to do here. And games like these days, every game just feels polished to perfection. These is 50 games that would probably never get released. They're just not quite good enough as a final thing. But like, it's just fascinating to see these little experiments in game design without having to polish it to from all angles to get a perfect game. So yeah, really enjoying that as a design experiment, and there are some great hits in there too, to varying degrees. So looking forward to continue exploring UFO 50.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of like a short story anthology, right?
Hmm.
Like none of them has to be a great American novel, so to speak, on its own, but each of them has something that makes it shine, right? And as I understand it, UFO 50 is made by multiple creators, right? It's not just the one.
Yes, there's I mean, Derek Yu from of Spelunky fame is the main creator, but there's a half a dozen designers who are each like they've all collaborated, but largely each one is designed by one person, including John Perry of who's done various board game designs. But there is also a meta commentary over the fictional game publisher in the universe of this has a sort of storyline playing out across these 50 games. So it's just cool to see that evolve over time as well.
Yeah, and that's what strikes me about games as such an amazing platform, analog and digital, is that, very rarely is a film made by one person, right?
Mm. Mm.
For instance, a film has a director and a videographer, perhaps, but it probably has actors on the other side of the screen, right? So it's very rare that the director, writer, and the actor is all the same person. Sure, it happens with student films and this and that, but video games, tabletop games, can be made by one person, or they can be made by 1,000 people, right? As the aforementioned Ubisoft example shows you, but they're still can still qualify for the game of the year, right? That's why Balatro probably surprised and rubbed so many people the wrong way for winning game of the year, when another game that was cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make,
Mm.
teamed by hundreds of artists, did not. Is one objectively better art than the other? No. because it's all subjective, right?
I do love seeing the game industry reward other kinds of games that aren't just the biggest budget out there. And like, but the budgets have ballooned so far beyond any sustainability. So it's great to see smaller games getting their time to shine and getting some more love out there. So yeah, great to see that the video game industry celebrating a more diverse range of what's possible in that space.
Right. Because I know that you're a proponent of this, but the video game industry doesn't have to be an industry, right?
Exactly.
People can
Yeah.
people can create games in a bunch of different ways, and we've talked about that for analog games as well. Some games are free, some games are only digital, some games come out with these lovely, expansive deluxe packages with these amazing tactile components, and others are freely given away on itch.io as well. So,
Well, speaking of, my final game that I wanted to quickly shout out, one I saw at the Vancouver Game Garden that we visited earlier this year, which was a handful of local game developers showcasing their games in various states and on Game Boy cartridges and NES pistols. And this was Noise One from local designer Chevy Ray, who this game came out a few years ago. It is on itch.io. I think it's pay what you want. I think is the price there. So it was upgraded this year to include some sound, and I think that was like what made it for me was the sound design that's gone into this latest update. And basically, it's a typing game with you're looking at an interface for a computer with ASCII art. It's like an old sci-fi, very analog technology. Looking at maps of a space station, but represented with ASCII art, like sort of old school Dwarf Fortress, for example, or is it? Rogue, was that I think the original roguelike?
yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Roguelike
So
comes
you're
from
looking
Rogue
at
or
like
Net
your
Hack. Hack. Those are some early ones as well.
yeah. So your character and the various enemies are just represented by letters, and like there are doors that are labeled like A, B, C, and you just have to type open A, close B, and there are other mechanics that are layered on over time. But it was a great sense of tension, and it's basically a survival horror game as you're trying to maneuver through. It's like a stealth game, so you're maneuvering through these space stations, avoiding the guards. You're guiding another person through there. So yeah, I don't play many typing games. There's a few newer ones like Cryptmaster that I need to try. So really enjoyed the pacing as a typing game there. So that is like if you're not great at typing, that is going to be a bit of a hang up, obviously. But there was a solid story there as well. Like basically dealt through text logs. But for a very indie game made by one person, it was a really solid, unique experience that I really enjoyed.
All right. Speaking of pacing, I think we're going to need to pick up the pace because we've been going a little long on video games. Let's talk about analog games if that works for you.
Yes, let's get to it.
All right. You want to start us off with
Yeah.
your list? It's longer than mine.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little brief with these anyway because it's so hard to, like, sometimes I feel like I need to listen to old episodes of the podcast to remind myself how I thought about these games as we played so many. But a few that I remember having very positive experiences of. The first one is Arcs. So this is the new game from Colworley and Leader Games that came out earlier this year. Space combat game using trick taking. And I think like the headline is like it's a trick taking space combat game, but I think the trick taking is a little bit overstated in that it's using trick taking language as a sort of as a tool rather than it's not explicitly trick taking. It's using that, tweaking that as a framework, and what it does is make things incredibly improvised and dynamic, and you can never really plan ahead. It's like the bureaucracy of like once your space empire is spread across all these galaxies, you can't entirely control when you get to build and when you get to send your units out. There's a little bit of delay in how you can manage the bureaucracy there. So some great narrative moments we brought out of that. It's a game that is constantly shifting, like because you can't plan ahead on based on the cards you've got in hand, and the victory conditions are constantly shifting. So you really have to be okay with just thinking on your feet and improvising and being okay if everything just blows up and suddenly the game shifts away from what you need it to do. But just enjoying that sort of the overall narrative of the board state, even if you aren't necessarily going to win.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to play Arcs yet. It's Kyle Farron art, and it's what's that company again? Leader? Is it
Yes.
Leader game? Yeah, I have a mixed relationship with them. Some people know that I'm not a big fan of Root, their ultra popular sort of big title, and I've had a mixed experience with some of their other games. But I'm certainly interested in this one. I like space games, so I'd like to give it a shot.
Yeah, I'd love to get back to that sometime soon, potentially, and really get into it more. I've barely scratched the surface of what's possible in that game.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to mention a couple of games quickly since we've recorded full episodes of them. Let's go to Japan. We covered
Hmm.
before earlier in the year. Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle Earth was one of our recent ones, so go check that out. A game that I see is on both of our lists, I'll mention because we played it recently, and it was new to me, though maybe not new in 2024, is a little card game called Sea Salt and Paper.
Oh, I didn't know if it left this one that much of an impression. But yeah, this was a big one for me earlier in the year, and I wanted to revisit it before we could
Yeah,
have a discussion.
it's left an impression in me because it's recent that we played it. This game is certainly cute. I think that's the one single word I would use for it
Mm.
as I'll wrap it up. The artwork is obviously fantastic. I don't know if anyone who hasn't seen it yet hasn't seen the artwork. It's basically all like photographs of handmade, obviously handmade origami
Mm.
pieces that all have a sort of a underwater or sort of ocean nautical theme to it. So lots of fish, lots of sharks, lots of shells, lots of swimmers and things like that. And that part of it is absolutely charming,
Mm.
is the artwork. So that part of it is very memorable. And I've only played it once or twice when you showed it to me when we were playing it with Chris a couple of weeks ago. But I thought it was quite serviceable, enjoyable in a light way, just kind of cute,
Yeah,
like a
it's a
nice way
small
to pass
box
your time.
game. Like, yeah, it doesn't have to be a particularly exciting experience. I've been quite dismissive of it and other small box games as being a little too light until I finally got to try it, and it does a great job of that the tension of the push your luck, because like it's split into several rounds of indeterminate length, and basically once you get to a certain number of points, you can decide to end it there or push your luck a little bit further. And so there's that tension there of the round by round, and also the tension of individual card draw, because like you can draw a face up card or you can draw a face down card, and trying to form these sets. And so lots of little micro moments of tension that just keep the game going. And I just remember playing it a bunch at TCTC earlier this year, and just like cackling when a certain card was drawn. That is the perfect combo, or like you just complete the set at the perfect moment. And so yeah, light game, but lots of great little moments of tension there.
Yeah, I will probably end up picking up that game
Hmm.
because, it has things going for it. Art is great. Obviously, it's small, compact, great for like a family trip or something like that. And I'm always looking for a lighter game I can play with the family.
Hmm.
And my experience with it was very brief, so it's not comprehensive by far. I didn't really catch a lot of the sort of take that or like kind of push your luck aspect of it too much, because there's basically like two ways to end a round. Basically, someone can say that's it when they feel like they have 7 points, I think
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
is. And then another one is to say like last call or something. You got like a one more round to finish it, and then the reason why you do that is because you're betting that you have more of one color or something like
You have
that.
more points than anyone else, which will give you bonus points if you win that bet.
Right, but I could see that probably the way I would teach it is I would just like not include that ladder mode, right, and just like let it run out. Just like when someone definitely has 7 points, the first person to get there just calls it, and then everyone shows like a showdown, kind of
It,
like Hold'em, Texas Hold'em or something.
that is definitely what makes it unique, I think, is that tension there of being able to push your luck. But it is a little confusing, that sort of flow chart of what scores what, if there's a bet, if there's not a bet, who wins, who loses. It's a little bit confusing for such a lighter game. So I can
Right.
see a reason to get, yeah.
But the good thing is that you could like ease that in, right?
Yeah.
Like after you teach them one way, you can just
Mm.
add that new twist to it, and then that would add obviously the full game experience to it. So
Sure.
that could be a good way to handle it. How about yourself? What other analog games are you playing?
Yeah, let's have a look here. One I wanted to shout out was Daybreak. So this is the cooperative game about climate change. Won the Kennerspiel, I believe, earlier this year. So it's a cooperative game about trying to manage your carbon pollution. Each player playing a nation like the US or China or I think Europe is like not necessarily a nation, a region, I guess. And basically you're playing the tableaus, and it's just a really fun puzzle. Each person has their own tableau of cards that they're managing that no one else can influence necessarily. You've got your hand of cards playing into these tableaus, and it's that fascinating puzzle of, well, each card can either be played to amend one of your current stacks of cards. Sorry, each is 5 stacks basically that have tags on them, and each card can amend a current stack or replace a current stack to create a new ability, and or be discarded for other effects. And there's just this constant little puzzle. It's just fascinating just managing that by yourself. But then there's this fascinating level of interaction in it. It's very asymmetrical in that, like, some of these regions just have a much tougher time. They have more carbon coming in every round. They have a higher population, so it's just the game is just harder for them. So it's this very organic way of encouraging some interaction, but rather than just quarterbacking, you can't actually interact out of the gate. You have to earn the right to be able to interact by forming the right combos. So again, it's a very organic way of encouraging that interaction without it just being a quarterbacking situation. But I really enjoyed that dynamic.
Yeah, I've only played Daybreak a couple times with you on Board Game Arena, I think it was.
Hmm.
We played online, but in real time, so it went pretty quickly, and that worked well. I don't imagine that it would work well asynchronously anyway.
Hmm.
And the first couple of times, I think we played a 2 or 3 games in quick succession because it is very easy to fail that game,
Oh yes,
as we
there's
found.
one way
And
out and a lot of ways to die.
right.
Yeah.
And like a lot of, I guess, cooperative games, I was sort of floundering there at the beginning. There's a lot going on. It's a lot
Hmm.
more complex than, say, like a pandemic where everyone's mostly doing the same sorts of things. In this game, because it's card and tableau based, the variation of things is great. And like you said, those regions are interesting in that they sort of narratively have a great deal of asymmetry built in.
Hmm.
I think you said America was there with a lot of cars and industry. China is there with a lot of industry and population, and then I think there was like the wider world or something like that.
It's like the global south. I can't remember the exact
Yeah,
name. Yeah.
and they had entirely different concerns as well, so I thought that was really cool from a thematic perspective, but as a novice coming in, it was pretty bewildering to
Hmm.
sort of dive into that. I think there's something good there, but it just sort of felt like a bit fiddly to me, and I generally like games that let you sort of like be play like a person, right? It's
Fair.
sort of like,
Hmm.
I don't know how well you connect with playing
It's all very
a
zoomed
region
out.
of Earth,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's a little bit disconnected
Hmm.
to the scale that I'm used to considering.
That's fair.
Yeah. All right. I don't have a lot of board games to mention, so I'll just quickly mention that obviously I've been playing some Slay the Spire. Watch out for our
Hmm.
feature episode of that coming up. And another new game that I started playing for the first time with my kid was called Stardew Valley.
Oh.
So, of course, I'm not talking about a video game. I'm talking about the board game based on the video game, which is another cooperative affair. I didn't really know how this game was going to play out when I learned about it, but my oldest kid is really into Stardew Valley, and it was like their Christmas present. They asked for this,
Hmm. Nice.
so it was not driven by me whatsoever, and I was thoroughly interested to see how it would play out. Would it live up to their impression of their sort of desires? Would it live up to the brief experience of the video game that I have? And it's interesting. It does something unlike Slay the Spire, where Slay the Spire is like very much in the mold of the game. You do stuff in the board game what you do in the video game. Stardew Valley is sort of the inspired by the video game sort of take on it. It's much more a Euro game. It's much more sort of like abstraction of what you do in the video game. And I think, that was the right route to take. It definitely, has the artwork to satisfy fans of the video game, even though it's slightly more sort of like painterly and illustrator like than the very pixel art, retro style pixel art of the video game. So, I've only played it once or twice, but I thought it was enjoyable overall. And I don't know, like there were some fiddly things where we probably glossed over some stuff. Cooperative games, you can kind of do that, right?
Hand
You
wave
can
it a
kind of
bit, yeah.
gloss over some things because it's like, hey, yeah, we're all working for
As
the
long as
same
it feels
team, right?
fair, it's yeah.
Yeah, there's not so many people are sort of checking crossing the I's and dotting the T's as if it was a competitive game.
So I did hear it's an incredibly difficult game.
I don't know. The game we played, we sort of like were wondering if we were going to be able to pull it off by the last round. And we pulled it off by the skin of our teeth. And I'm wondering, well, for the first time we played, that was somewhat easy that we were able to do that. And maybe that's because we cheated. I don't know. So the jury's out on this game. I'll have to play it some more. But I think it pleased my kid for their level of enjoyment. And I was pleased to learn that their very good friend also got a copy of it just recently, so
Oh,
they definitely have someone to play it with. And I'll give it another shot as well.
awesome. Yeah, I'm curious to compare that to Mythwind, which we covered
Hmm.
earlier in the year, which was going for very much a very much inspired by Stardew Valley, but more of the gentle, uh, very very gentle cooperative vibes rather than the difficult cooperative challenge.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I mean, I have played Mythwind as well. Obviously, we had a feature episode covering that one, so go check that out if you're listening and haven't caught it. But I think Mythwind was a lot more like asynchronous, not asynchronous, asymmetrical
Mm,
in how the players played. Basically, each player had their own set of mini games that they were playing, and that very much was not the case with Slay the
yes.
Spire.
Yeah.
You're mostly doing the same stuff. You mostly have the same abilities. You have like slight differences in the tool set. It's the literal tools that you're responsible for. Like you're the fishing guy and I'm the farming guy or something like that. That's how the gameplay differentiates itself. And really it's not all that different. So it's kind of like Pandemic there, where you're mostly doing the same sort of stuff with a slight tweak to how efficient you are at certain aspects.
So, well, let's quickly burn through a couple of final board games before we move on. The next one I wanted to mention was Kutna Hora, the City of Silver. So this is a sort of a Euro economic game. Lot of just buying resources, like buy high, sell low, fairly simple mechanics. You're putting some buildings into a central sort of grid of a town. Fairly straightforward in that, but there is a couple of mechanics that really make this stand out, and that there's six factions, I think, six guilds, each one sort of controlling a particular type of resource, whether it's ore or beer or food, and each player can only interact with three of them, I believe, three of the six. But it's all arranged in such a way that for any given resource, you're jostling with one other player. So with beer, I'm jostling with, I'm sort of going back and forth with you. But on food, I'm going back and forth with Chris, and you and Chris are going back and forth on ore. And so there's this really interesting dynamic in how you sort of have a rivalry. These micro rivalries in lots of different areas. Actually, manipulating that economy was incredibly tough, and it was like everything was a three-stage process. We were going to buy the plot of land, we were going to buy the blueprints for the building, we were going to build the building, and so it was like steering a ship. It was just incredibly slow, but when you do get it, it's incredibly satisfying. Be very opportunistic, jumping at the right opportunity as it arrives, rather than planning ahead too much. There's so many moving parts that there's literally what they call a cardboard computer. It's basically a deck of cards. You're pulling cards out and moving levers to reveal the price of cards, because there's so many moving pieces in how you calculate the prices in this game. So yeah, as an economic game, and playing with some fun dynamics in the rivalries there. I had a great time with Kutna Hora.
Nice. Haven't played that one, but it That asymmetry is somewhat interesting between the players. It reminded me a little bit of between two cities, or
Yeah. Well, you're only looking at two immediate neighbors. Mm.
right. All right. Any other board games you want to
Yeah,
cover?
just one other quick one is that in around TCTC when I was playing Sea Salt and Paper, I was in the mood for like a lot of lighter games that I could play quickly with a wide variety of people. So the other big one I was playing a lot of was The King is Dead. So this is an older game from Osprey, designed by Pierre Sylvester. It's a map of Europe. You have a bunch of cubes. I think there's like three colors of cubes: blue, red, yellow, that represent the three um, factions. I think it's Scotland and Britain and Wales or something like that, if I recall correctly. But like no one player controls those. Each player has a handful of those cubes, and you're basically trying to push for which faction you want to win. But the game is played over 8 rounds. You have 8 cards in your hand. Each one is a round. Each one of those cards will let you place or move those cubes onto the board. It's a classic knife fight in a phone box game. It's really efficient design. Again, I love that sense of shared components that no one controls, that you're all pushing and pulling for the same those same shared resources. So yeah, that was a great time. He's dead.
Yeah, I think I played that game once with you at TCTC, and I enjoyed it. Of course, I won, so that colored my opinion of the
And you
game.
still remembered it, so yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, you're right. There is a certain efficiency to that game that works really well. Osprey is interesting. I didn't realize they published so many board games
Mm.
because I'm a bit more familiar with their war game work. They have a line of really cute sort of war games in a variety of different themes. They have this kind of little blue strip at the bottom, and they're really short books, but they are a very reasonable cost, and they're doing some interesting stuff on that side.
Yeah, it's a great publisher. I nearly put on Imperium Horizons on my list, which was their new big box of Imperium Classics, which was my favorite, which was my game of the year when Imperium Classics came out. So I love that series. I didn't need to belabor the facts, but yeah, they've got a great selection.
Nice. All right. Well, I think it's time we jumped over into the third leg of our
Yeah.
OmniGamer tent. So I just have a few games I'm going to mention. Some TTRPGs I was happy to get to the table a few times this past year. City of Mist. I'm not going to talk about it at length because we covered it. We discussed it fairly recently,
And I've now
but
played it.
yeah, I got to run it for my regular sort of D&D group. We ran a sort of mini campaign of that, which got my toes wet, dipped into that system, and I really enjoyed playing it. For me, it's a very easy system to run because it's heavily narratively focused. The rules are fairly light, and it encourages sort of improvisation and just kind of creativity, trying stuff. And I
Mm.
really like that aspect of the game. Really easy to pick up, but there is a sort of established world. If you're interested in picking up the books, they're really kind of sort of lavishly put together. Fantastic original artwork throughout. Really creative scenarios and side characters and missions. It's got a lot going for it. That's not just sort of your run of the mill sort of normal PBTA powered by the apocalypse game. It's doing its own thing.
Yeah, we played this at a one shot over the holidays, and I'll probably talk about it a little more in the next playlist. But just to say briefly that it was an incredibly intuitive system. The tags, I think they're called,
Yeah,
basically attributes for your character that
power
could be
tags,
related
right?
to a power or a weapon or a relationship. Incredibly broad, but very intuitive, and gives you lots of little narrative hooks. And it had that sort of sense of pulling on the narrative, those narrative beats without being bogged down by stats like scum and villainy. You might have a narrative beat, but my piloting skill is one, so there's no point in me attempting that. There's none of those restrictions here, so you're a little more free to just follow the narrative and follow what's right for the character rather than following the attributes of your character
Yeah,
sheet.
the character and also the moment. You're encouraged
Mm.
to sort of interpret the 12 or so power tags that make up a given character in each and every situation, which it's surprising. You see the character in a new light each situation that you run into, which is surprising from just a few handfuls of words on a page.
Yeah, I struggled a little bit with just how freeform it was, but perhaps it was a very much a no prep like session that we ran. I hadn't read any of the rules, but like we were able to run it quite successfully without that. You were just guiding us through it, and said very intuitive to be able to play it. The boots on the ground, and I'm curious to try it some more with a better grasp of the system and how I can leverage it a little more.
Yeah, we'll probably continue that for one or two more sessions.
Hmm.
So hopefully everyone gets a proper taste of it. How about yourself? Other TTRPGs you're playing?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't going to be a particularly broad range of experiences. This year was when I first started getting back into them properly. Mostly some solo experiences. I've only got a couple of sort of multiplayer games under my belt, but I wanted to shout out like the game that basically kicked this off for me was Portal at Hill House by Travis Hill. Basically a solo journaling zine. It's like very little prompts. It's just you know, I think it was you use a deck of cards. I don't even remember. I think you roll a dice. But it's one of those things where the randomization system doesn't even matter. It's just there is a system for randomizing what room you're going into. You basically imagine this cabin or mansion or some house filled with cosmic horror weirdness, and just journaling about what you find there with some very light prompts. And I don't have a great point of perspective in comparing this to other systems, but it was for me it was the game that made me realize that hey, I'm actually capable of journaling. It's not as intimidating as it seems. Just just go with the flow and see what words you can get onto the page. And so I enjoyed that, and as I mentioned before, like the cosmic horror weirdness gave some flexibility without having to get bogged down by logic, right? Anything goes because they don't have to be logical or follow Euclidean physics. You can just make up whatever you feel like in the moment. Train of thought.
Yeah, I'm really sort of encouraged by you dipping your toes into the solo RPG genre. I talk a big game about collecting a lot of these books. I own a lot of solo RPG books, but I haven't really dove in head first myself. So I really need to follow your lead. I have a bunch of good ones, like I was mentioning that Star Trek Adventures Captain's Log book the other day, which is a really robust, beautifully put together little digest thing. But I also have a bunch of small indies too that I really need to crack open. So I intend to do that this year, 2025.
Yeah, I've picked up quite a few in the last few months that I'm looking to explore that a little more and leaning into the journaling side of things, comparing those systems and seeing just how far I can push myself.
Very nice. I'm going to mention another system I was able to try out as a GM this past year. It's called The Strange, which is a game set in using the Cypher system, the Cypher RPG engine by Monty Cook Games. So go check it out. It's a defunct series now, but you can still find the books here and there, and it's basically like X-Files esque, like we were talking about the Triangle Agency the other day, sort of control. Like it's sort of bureaucracy meets dark horror and sci-fi. Just touching all the genre touchstones that I love. Got to try it out with my regular D&D group. We ran a little mini campaign of that, and I wasn't able to convince them of it, but I really enjoyed tackling that system. And as a GM, you just have to like dive in. You just have to dive in and sort of fail. I recognize the areas which I failed, so I will hopefully be able to improve upon my GMing of that next time out. But I think that game has so much to offer in terms of story hooks, world building, and mechanically it plays like a dream. So I definitely want to go back to that game world, The Strange. I think it's definitely Monty Cook is responsible for the Cypher system, but it's one of his Bruce Cordell, I believe, one of his longtime writing collaborators who's responsible for the Strange system itself. And both Monty Cook and Bruce Cordell are old school Wizards of the Coast employees that worked on D&D 3.0, for instance.
Cool.
Yeah, so they have a long track record.
Well, speaking of GMing and just going for it, it is one of my goals for 2025 is to try my hand at GMing for the first time, even if it's just with my daughter and one of her friends, perhaps, as to like a good some good guinea pigs potentially before I dive into anything too involved. But I want to find a fairly low rule system that I can try GMing perhaps.
Nice. Is there
Um,
another good RPG experience you had this past year?
Yeah, well, what we mentioned Indiana Jones and his particular breed of archaeology. One that explored perhaps a little more authentic version of archaeology is 1,000-year-old Campfire, also known as Old Morris Cave. So this is a spin-off of 1,000-year-old Vampire by Tim Hutchings. Basically, it's somewhat of a solo journaling game, but rather than like written words, you're creating an archaeological strata graph of the layers of accumulation over time, of layers building up and holes being dug down and artifacts being left behind. And again, you're not having to think too creatively about it, but it's just an opportunity to think about the process of time, the way he uses the graphs and the randomization charts, and like basically flow charts in the map. In the book are dealt in a really poetic way of the flow and the cycle of time, like whether it's a long period of just the same thing happening over and over again of generations of animals living and dying, or if it's just like one person living alone for a short period of time. And so it was just a fascinating contemplative experience, and great to see some like authentic archaeology. It's the closest I've been to the real thing in many years. So I had a great time with that. Old Morris Cave.
Very nice. I think the last RPG I'm going to mention is the latest one I'm playing regularly with my D&D group. I say my D&D group, but as you probably heard, we cover a few different systems and different genres. And the one that I'm a player in most recently has been Cyberpunk Red, which is the latest iteration of the Cyberpunk TTRPG series, obviously made famous by Cyberpunk 2077, the video game.
Mm.
So that system I'd never played in the past. I'd only played knockoffs like Shadowrun and other systems like that before. But I've always enjoyed Cyberpunk, like the fiction, the movies, the books from William Gibson, for instance. And it was really interesting to try this one out. It's a lot more crunch and a little bit more old school than some of the newer systems I've been reading, but it has some charm to it. It's very much skill based, so it has this massive list of skills, and you can add them to your attributes, like you might imagine you would in D&D. But the skills obviously are very different than you might face in D&D. You know, just like how dapper you dress, like dressing yourself is one of the skills, which I happen to put some points in because my character, sort of an elegant man, sort of a noble, a guy who lost his family, his house, so to speak, and is trying to claw it back. So it was very important to me that my character had a few things that were just important to him, but that were not necessarily important to surviving in a cutthroat world. They were just sort of as touchstones that he lives by his own code. So the system encourages you to play that way, not just min-maxing everything. And so we're still playing it. I think we'll probably do a few more sessions, but that game, obviously there's a reason why CD Projekt Red found it fertile ground to develop their latest video game outing. There's some dodgy things as well. I don't like the idea of cyber psychosis. Obviously, Cyberpunk 2020 was written a long time ago when basically people thought that putting artificial things in your body made you less human. It's literally built into the game rules that you
Yeah.
lose humanity as you augment yourself. And, the modern viewpoint of the world is very much opposed to that. So I sort of brought that up with the GM, Paul, my neighbor and friend, who was very receptive to that. He was like, "Oh yeah, we don't have to call it that. We just call it something else." And I don't believe that. The world has shown there's people that lose 3/4 of their body and they're just as human and just as wonderful God's creatures, if you want to use that word, despite the fact that they've had to have some of their original parts replaced and augmented, right?
Yeah, for all the
So yeah,
progressiveness of Cyberpunk, you can fall into some very ableist tropes, unfortunately. But you can tweak it to your liking, I guess. That's good.
yeah, and the thing about Cyberpunk that's interesting is that like it is sort of a relic in its own right, right?
Mm.
It's not futuristic anymore. It's sort of quaint in how it sort of believes things. A lot of the things it warned about came true, ironically. But because they came true, it sort of seems a little bit laughable that we're, so shocked, but it's not shocking, basically, cyberpunk as a genre. So you kind of have to bring your own thing into it. But where some modern games have treated cyberpunk as a sort of aesthetic, a visual aesthetic, not
Mm.
not naming
Mm.
any names here, but 2025. But you kind of, it's like a prism. You look into it and see what you want to see, and it has many facets to it. And I think that world still has interesting things that it's offering, and I'm enjoying the game. I'm playing it so far with my neighbors.
Very cool. Yeah, I just started reading some William Gibson for a book club, so I'm quite likely going to be inspired to dig into some cyberpunk of some form soon.
Very cool. Next game genre we're going to tackle cyberpunk. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Well, one final game I wanted to quickly shout out, another big highlight I had playing this year was Mothership. So I did a one shot at Rain City Games earlier in the year. It was my first experience with OSR, I think it's called, and that system. And I don't know much about the heritage. I know there's been some issues with that in the past. It's been taken in a lot of different directions, though, the OSR systems. And what I really appreciated is just how quick and easy it is to just hit the ground running and roll up a character. And where I can appreciate something like City of Mist in how freeform it is and just being narrative and no like skills and attributes. I admit I think personally I love having the skills and rolling dice and gamifying things a little more to ground me. And yet it did still have some good narrative hooks. Like I think you roll for like some flair for your character, basically some randomized flair that just like helps characterize and push you in a couple of little directions. And because it's like expected that you're probably going to die, you have to think about long-term planning for your character, right? You can just get into the action and enjoy the process and just roll with it. So I really enjoyed that. I recently picked up the deluxe box set, so looking forward to digging into that more. Maybe that's something I could try GMing. We'll see. So yeah, looking forward to playing more Mothership.
Yeah, I'd really love to see you crack open that box and run a game. I'd love to play a game that you run. And that game, Mothership, is obviously sort of a indie TTRPG darling right now. It's sort of like the new-ish hotness, even though it's been out for some time. But it's really taking up a lot of space and really introducing tabletop role playing in different genres, different settings to the wider audience. So kudos to them. Tuesday Night Games. I love all the success that they're having with that game, and obviously, you and I, we love the aliens verse.
Yes.
We love fighting capitalism out in space, and the horror aspects there and the sci-fi aspects
Untold
there. So,
horrors. Yeah.
what's not to love? All right, I think we covered some great games there.
Yeah, and got some good inspiration for next year, perhaps.
Fantastic. So those were the games we enjoyed. We found memorable in 2024, and we even discussed some gaming reflections, gaming ideas that we can try out in 2025 as well. So feel free to reach out to us on social media. Let us know what games excited you in 2024 and what games that you want to make happen for yourself in 2025.
Yeah, and if you have any suggestions for games you'd like to see us cover, like I said, we love older games, smaller games. We like covering a broad spectrum there, so anything is fair. And yeah, if you want to join the club and talk about our current featured game or anything else, you can contact us at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or at our website omnigamers.club.
All right. And if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, you can go there and check us out and subscribe. And you can see our lovely cats as they make visual appearances on the video stream as well when we put these episodes out.
Yep, and you can find us on Blue Sky, both the podcast account as Omni Gamers Club, but my personal account there is Board Game Feast.
Yep, and I'm Omni Gamer Mark on Blue Sky and Facebook.
Excellent. Well, looking to the future of 2025, Mark, what are we covering next episode?
Yeah, I think we're going to be covering that game I mentioned a little while ago, Slay the Spire. I played a little bit more of that game with my oldest kid over the holidays, and we got through a campaign. Yay!
Excellent. Yeah, I just played through the digital version for the first time in a couple of years. So lots to talk about there in the broad state of roguelike games and game, what do you call it?
Adaptations.
Yeah, adaptations, that's the word.
There you go. All right, gung ho. This is the first episode of 2025, and we'll be putting a bunch more out soon enough.
Excellent.
So check us out until then.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Daniel. And until next time, to those out there in the listening space, have a very balanced diet of gaming.
Bye.
Bye.